You are not stuck. You are holding on. You may tell yourself that life feels heavy because today is difficult, because the world is unfair, because people disappointed you, or because things did not go the way they should have gone. But if you look closely, the real weight is not always in what is happening now. Many times, the weight is in what you have not released yet. You keep returning to the same memories, the same mistakes, the same conversations you wish ended differently, the same moments you wish you could go back and change. And every time you revisit them, you may think you are trying to understand them. But often, you are not healing them. You are strengthening them. This is not reflection anymore. It is repetition. And repetition becomes identity when you do not interrupt it. At Stoicism Breath, this is one of the hardest truths to accept. You cannot move forward while your mind is still anchored to something that no longer exists. You cannot build a new life while giving most of your attention to a chapter that has already ended. Nothing changes, not because you are weak, not because you lack opportunity, but because you have not made the decision to stop feeding what is already over. The past has no power by itself. It only has the power you continue to give it. Every time you replay the same pain, every time you reopen the same wound, every time you return to the same old story, you hand your energy back to something that can no longer be changed. And while you are reliving yesterday, your life is waiting for you to begin again. This is not complicated, but it is uncomfortable. As long as your hands are full of yesterday, you have nothing left to build tomorrow. Many people confuse holding on with understanding. They believe that if they think about it one more time, analyze it one more time, replay the moment one more time, they will finally find peace. But the mind does not heal through endless repetition. It deepens what it repeats. Every time you revisit the same memory without awareness, you are training your brain to go back there, to live there, to return there without asking your permission. Slowly, what began as one painful moment becomes a pattern. And that pattern becomes your default state. This is why letting go is not just emotional. It is strategic. Letting go is the decision to stop feeding a loop that no longer serves your life. And understand this clearly. Letting go does not mean what happened was acceptable. It does not mean you forget. It does not mean you pretend it did not matter. It means you stop allowing it to control your present. It means you stop reopening a wound that was already trying to close. Because every time you go back, you interrupt your own healing. You keep yourself in a state that feels familiar, even if it is painful. And that is what many people do not want to admit. They do not hold on because the past is powerful. They hold on because the past is familiar. Pain becomes predictable. And predictable can feel safe to the mind, even when it is destroying your peace. So you tell yourself stories to justify staying there. You say you need closure. You say you need answers. You say you need to understand why it happened. But sometimes, what you are really doing is delaying the decision to release it. Because letting go requires something most people are not trained to do. It requires you to move forward without having every answer, without having every wound explained, without having the past neatly wrapped into something that finally makes sense. And this is where real strength begins, not when everything is clear, but when you choose to continue even without clarity. There is a difference between learning from the past and living in it. Learning is brief. It is intentional. It gives you direction. Living in it is constant. It is automatic. It takes direction away from you. And if you are honest with yourself, you already know which one you are doing. You do not need more insight. You need a boundary, a line inside yourself where you decide this is where it stops. Not because it no longer hurts, but because you no longer allow it to lead. Imagine carrying a heavy bag every single day. Not because you need it, but because you have carried it for so long that it feels normal. At some point, you stop questioning the weight. You just accept that life is supposed to feel heavy, but the weight was always optional. And the moment you put it down, nothing around you may change immediately. The world may look the same. The people may be the same. The past may still be the past. But inside you, everything begins to shift. Your mind gets quieter. Your thoughts become clearer. Your energy starts to return. And for the first time in a long time, you have space to build something new. But that only happens when you make a clean decision, not a partial decision, not a conditional decision. Not I will let go when I understand more. Not I will let go when I feel ready, because readiness is often a trap. You may never feel ready to release something that defined you for so long. You may never feel ready to stop identifying with the pain you carried. You may never feel ready to close a chapter that shaped the way you see yourself. So do not wait for readiness. Decide first. Then your mind will slowly follow. Your emotions will adjust. Your energy will return. And your life will begin to open again. At Stoicism Breath, this is where freedom starts. Not when the past disappears, but when you stop allowing it to lead your present. You decide first, then your mind follows. Then your emotions begin to adjust. That is what real control looks like. It is not waiting for the right feeling. It is choosing a direction before you feel ready and committing to it anyway. At Stoicism Breath, this is the turning point most people miss. You are not your past. You are not your mistakes. You are not what someone did to you. Those are events. They happened. But they are not your identity unless you keep holding on to them. And the longer you carry those events, the more they begin to merge with how you see yourself. Until one day you cannot separate who you are from what happened to you. That is where people lose themselves. Not in the moment of pain, but in the decision to keep carrying it forward. So if you want your life to change, it does not start with motivation. It does not start with a new goal. It starts with release, a clean break between what was and what is. You stop feeding what is already over. You stop going back to what is finished. You stop negotiating with something that no longer has a place in your life. And when you do that, something powerful happens. You create space. And in that space, something new can finally begin. Not because the past disappeared, but because you stopped allowing it to lead you forward. Now here is where it gets even more real. Confidence is not something you wait to feel. Confidence is something you prove. Most people believe they lack confidence because life is difficult. But the deeper truth is this. They stop trusting themselves. Think about it. Every time you tell yourself you will do something, and you do not follow through, you weaken that trust. Not in front of others. Inside your own mind. And that is where confidence is built or destroyed quietly. No noise. No attention. Just small moments where you either keep your word or you break it. Over time, those moments stack. They form a pattern. And that pattern becomes how you see yourself. So when you say, I do not feel confident, what you are really saying is, I do not trust myself anymore. And that has nothing to do with talent. Nothing to do with intelligence. Nothing to do with luck. It has everything to do with consistency. Confidence is not a personality trait. It is a record. A record of how often you show up. How often you follow through. How often you act even when you do not feel like it. This is where most people get it wrong. They wait to feel confident before they act. They believe the feeling comes first, and then the action follows. But it does not work like that. Action comes first. Repetition follows. And confidence is the result. If you are waiting to feel ready, you will stay exactly where you are. Because readiness is not a signal. It is an illusion. You build confidence by moving before you feel it. By acting while doubt is still present. By doing the thing even when your mind is telling you not to. And you do not need big dramatic actions to begin. You need small actions that you can repeat. Confidence is built in small wins, not big moments. It is built when you wake up and complete one simple task you promised yourself. It is built when you follow through on something easy to ignore. Something no one else would even notice. But you notice, and that is what matters. Because every time you keep a promise to yourself, your mind updates its image of you. It starts to see you as someone who executes, not just someone who talks. And that shift changes everything. You hesitate less. You second-guess yourself less. You stop needing constant validation from others, because you already have proof from your own actions. This is also why comparison destroys confidence so quickly. The moment you start comparing yourself to someone else, you stop focusing on your own record. You start measuring your life against results you did not build, timelines you did not choose, and standards that were never meant for you. And the more you do that, the more disconnected you become from your own progress. You lose motivation not because you are failing, but because you are looking in the wrong direction. The only comparison that matters is this: who you were before, and what you are doing now. Nothing else matters. Stay focused on your own actions. Build your own record. Keep your own promises. Because at the end of the day, confidence is not something you wait for. It is something you build, one decision at a time. If you want to rebuild confidence, you have to start by changing something most people ignore: your internal dialogue. At Stoicism Breath, this is where real transformation begins, not in what you do outside, but in how you speak to yourself when no one is watching. Because the way you talk to yourself becomes the way you experience your life. If your default language is negative, if you keep repeating that you are not good enough, that you always fail, that you cannot do it, then you are not just thinking those words, you are programming your behavior. You are creating resistance before you even take the first step. Think about that for a moment. How many times have you stopped yourself before even trying, not because the situation was impossible, but because your mind already decided the outcome? That is not reality, that is conditioning. So the goal is not to replace negative thoughts with fake positivity. The goal is to shift your language into something constructive, something that allows movement, something that keeps you in the game. You do not need to tell yourself you are the best. You need to tell yourself you are improving. You do not need to say you are perfect. You need to say you are consistent. And that is enough. Because confidence does not come from perfection, it comes from stability, the ability to rely on yourself regardless of the outcome. And this is where discipline becomes the foundation. Discipline is not intensity, it is not motivation, it is not a burst of energy. Discipline is doing what needs to be done even when you do not feel like it. It is acting without negotiating with your mood, without waiting for inspiration, without asking yourself if today feels right. Because your feelings are unstable, they change every day. But your standards should not. Your actions should not depend on how you feel, they should depend on what you decided. And when you start operating like that, something powerful begins to shift. You stop being controlled by temporary emotions. You stop reacting based on how you feel in the moment. And you start building a version of yourself that is predictable, reliable, and strong. Over time, that version becomes your identity, not because you declared it, but because you proved it through repetition. So if you want confidence, stop chasing the feeling. Build the evidence. Show up. Follow through. Repeat. And let your actions speak louder than your doubts. Because at the end of the day, confidence is not something you think. It is something you earn, one decision at a time. Now here is another truth most people do not want to face. You are not exhausted because life is too hard. You are exhausted because you are constantly giving your energy to things that do not deserve it. And the most dangerous part is that this does not happen all at once. It happens slowly, quietly, in ways that feel normal, until one day you realize you have no focus, no clarity, no drive left. And then you blame yourself. You think you are weak, unmotivated, inconsistent. But that is not the truth. The truth is you have been leaking energy every single day without realizing it. You never stop to ask where your attention is going, who is consuming it, what habits are draining it. And until you become aware of that, you will keep repeating the same cycle, trying to push forward with an empty system. And it will never work. Because energy is not optional, it is the foundation of everything. How you think, how you act, how you respond, how you build your life, all of it depends on the energy you protect. If your energy is constantly being drained, your results will always reflect that, not because you lack ability, but because you lack protection. And most people never protect their energy. They give attention to every thought, every message, every opinion, every distraction. And then, they wonder why they feel scattered, why they cannot stay consistent, why they lose momentum so quickly. The answer is simple. They never decided what deserves their energy, and what does not. They treat everything as equally important. And that is the mistake. Not everything deserves your attention. Not everything deserves your reaction. And the more you respond to everything, the more you lose control over yourself. You become reactive instead of intentional. You start living based on what happens around you instead of what you choose to focus on. And that is where exhaustion truly begins. Not from doing too much, but from focusing on the wrong things. There are patterns that drain you more than anything else. And if you do not recognize them, they will keep repeating. One of the biggest is overthinking the past, replaying the same situations again and again, asking the same questions without ever moving forward. It feels like you are trying to solve something, but in reality, you are just consuming your energy without creating any progress. And the more you do it, the harder it becomes to focus on what actually matters. So the shift is simple but not easy. You become selective. You decide what deserves your attention. You protect your energy like it matters because it does. And when you do that, everything begins to change. Your mind becomes clearer. Your focus becomes stronger. Your actions become more intentional. And for the first time, you stop feeling overwhelmed, not because life became easier, but because you finally took control of where your energy goes. Replaying the same situations, asking the same questions, going in circles without resolution feels like you are trying to find answers, but in reality, you are only consuming your mental space. At Stoicism Breath, this is one of the most common patterns that quietly drains your life. The more you revisit the same story without direction, the harder it becomes to focus on anything new. Your mind stays occupied, your energy stays trapped, and your future stays on hold. And this is just one of the patterns. Another one is the environment you stay in. If you constantly surround yourself with negative people who complain, judge, criticize, and pull your mindset down, you will slowly become like them without even noticing. You do not need to fight them, you do not need to change them, but you do need to reduce your exposure, because energy is contagious. Stay in the wrong environment long enough, and it will shape how you think, how you speak, and how you see the world. Another pattern that quietly destroys your energy is trying to please everyone. Saying yes when you mean no, adjusting your behavior just to be accepted, avoiding conflict even when it costs your own peace. And every time you do that, you lose a part of yourself. You trade authenticity for approval. And that trade is always expensive, because in the process, you become disconnected from who you really are. You stop living, and you start performing. Then, there is distraction. Endless scrolling, consuming content without intention, comparing yourself to people you do not even know, filling your mind with noise instead of direction. This one feels harmless, but it is one of the most dangerous habits, because it slowly destroys your ability to focus, to think clearly, to stay present. And without focus, you cannot build anything meaningful. And finally, there is something many people do without realizing it. Taking responsibility for things that are not yours. Trying to fix other people, carrying problems you did not create, getting involved in situations that do not require your input. This is one of the fastest ways to burn out, because you are investing your energy in places where you have no control over the outcome. So what do? You do not need to disappear, you do not need to cut everything off. You need to become selective. You decide what enters your space, and what does not. You set boundaries, not loud, not aggressive, but consistent. You respond less, you engage less, you stop explaining yourself to people who do not respect your limits. You create distance where necessary. And most importantly, you protect your attention like it matters. Because it does. Start checking your energy every single day. Not once a month, not when you are already exhausted, but daily. Ask yourself simple questions. What gave me energy today? What took it away? And then adjust. Remove what drains you, reinforce what supports you. Over time, your system stabilizes. You become more focused, more present, more in control. And this is where real strength shows. Not in how much you can handle, but in how much you refuse to tolerate. Because real control is not about doing more. It is about allowing less. Less noise, less distraction, less unnecessary involvement. When you operate like that, something changes. You stop feeling overwhelmed. You start feeling clear, steady, and in control. Not because life became easier, but because you stopped giving your energy to things that do not move you forward. And here is something you need to understand clearly. Your brain is not broken. It is trained. Right now, it is trained to return to what is familiar, not what is useful. That is why the past keeps showing up. That is why the same memories keep returning. That is why the same emotions repeat. Not because they are true, but because they are practiced. Your brain repeats what it has seen the most, what it has felt the most, what it has rehearsed the most. If you have spent weeks, months, or even years replaying the same thoughts, then of course they will continue. Practice builds pathways, and pathways become automatic. So when a memory appears, it feels immediate, it feels real, it feels like it is happening again. And you react as if you are still inside that moment. But you are not. You are here now. The only reason it feels different is because you never trained your brain to separate memory from reality. You allowed the line to blur. And once that line disappears, your mind treats the past as the present. Your body responds the same way. The same tension, the same anxiety, the same emotional reaction again and again. And until you recognize this pattern, you will keep reliving something that is already over. But the moment you become aware of it, the moment you stop feeding it, you begin to take your control back. The goal is not to stop thoughts from appearing, because that is not something you can control. At Stoicism Breath, this is where clarity begins. You are not trying to silence your mind, you are learning how to relate to it differently. Because the real problem is not that thoughts exist, the problem is that you follow them automatically. You treat them like commands. But they are not commands. They are signals. And signals do not require obedience, they require awareness. The first step is recognition. Every time your mind pulls you back into the past, you pause, and you name it. This is a thought. This is a memory. This is not happening now. That simple distinction creates something powerful. It creates space. And that space is where control lives. Without that space, everything blends together. A thought feels like reality. An emotion turns into immediate action. And you lose the ability to choose. But the moment you create the gap, you begin to see what is actually happening. You stop being trapped inside the experience, and you start observing the process. And from there you can redirect. Not by force, not by fighting the thought, not by trying to suppress it, but by shifting your attention. You bring your focus back to the present moment, to what is in front of you, to what you can see, hear, and feel. Because the present is the only place where you have influence. The past has no power unless you keep giving it your attention. And attention is the currency your brain uses to decide what matters. Whatever you focus on grows stronger. Whatever you ignore fades over time. So if you keep feeding the same memories, they stay active. But if you stop engaging with them, if you stop giving them time and energy, they begin to weaken. Not instantly, not all at once, but gradually. And this is where most people give up. They expect instant change. They try once or twice, and when the thoughts come back, they assume nothing is working. But that is not how training works. You are not removing a habit, you are replacing it. And replacement requires consistency. Every time you interrupt the loop, every time you choose not to follow the thought, every time you return to the present, you are building a new pattern. And that pattern needs time to become stronger, just like the old one did. Another key factor is the language you use with yourself. Because language shapes perception, and perception shapes how you respond. If you keep telling yourself that the past ruined you, that you cannot move on, that you are stuck, then you reinforce that identity. You keep your mind locked in that story. But if you shift the language even slightly, everything begins to change. Instead of saying "this is who I am," you say "that was a moment, not my entire life." Instead of saying "I am stuck," you say "I am moving forward." You are not lying to yourself, you are giving your mind a direction that allows movement instead of resistance. And there is one more step most people ignore. You must give your brain something new to focus on. Because your mind cannot operate in empty space. If you remove the old pattern, but do not replace it, your brain will return to what it knows. So you build new routines. Simple, consistent actions that require your attention. Learning something new, practicing a skill, moving your body, writing your thoughts down. Anything that anchors you in the present and creates forward motion. Because forward motion sends a clear signal to your brain. The past is no longer the priority. And over time, that signal becomes your new default. Your mind stops returning to the same place. Not because you forced it, but because you trained it. And that is the difference. You are not trying to control your brain. You are training it. And once it is trained, it begins to work for you instead of against you. You are not your past. But if you keep repeating it, you will become it. That is where most people lose control. Not in the moment of failure, but in how they define themselves after it. Something happens, a mistake, a rejection, a loss. And instead of seeing it as an event, they turn it into an identity. They stop saying this happened to me, and they start saying this is who I am. And once that shift happens, everything follows. Your behavior aligns with that identity. Your decisions become smaller. Your expectations drop. Your actions slow down. And you begin to live inside a version of yourself that was never meant to be permanent. That is the real damage of the past. Not what happened, but how long you allow it to define who you are. Not what happened to you, but how long you allow it to define you. That is the real turning point. At Stoicism Breath, this is where most people lose control, not in the moment of failure, but in what they choose to believe afterward. Because the truth is simple, events end, but identities continue. And if you attach yourself to the wrong identity, you carry it into every future moment of your life. You walk into new opportunities with old labels already attached to your mind. You hesitate before you even begin. You doubt yourself before there is any real reason to doubt. And then you confirm the belief that is limiting you, not because it is true, but because you acted like it was. That is how people trap themselves. Not because of circumstances, but because of repetition. The same thought repeated, the same story reinforced, the same identity carried forward again and again. So if you want to break that pattern, you have to do something very clear and very direct. You separate what happened from who you are without negotiation. You failed, that is a fact. But you are not a failure, that is a decision. You were rejected, that happened. But you are not unworthy, that is a conclusion you made. And conclusions can be changed because they are based on interpretation, not reality. The moment you understand this, something shifts. You regain control. Because if identity is not fixed, then it can be rebuilt. Not through motivation, not through words, not through thinking differently, but through action repeated consistently. Because identity is not declared, it is demonstrated. You do not become someone new by telling yourself a different story. You become someone new by behaving differently and repeating the behavior until it becomes natural, until it becomes your standard. And this is where everything becomes real. You are not defined by what you did before. You are defined by what you do next. Your next decision carries more weight than your last mistake. Your next action matters more than your previous failure. But only if you take it. Because potential without execution means nothing. And most people stay stuck because they keep looking backward for answers instead of moving forward with action. They wait to feel different before they act. They wait for certainty before they try again. But that is not how change works. Change is built in motion, not in reflection. The longer you wait, the more power you give to the past. So you start small, not because small is easy, but because small is repeatable. You choose one action that aligns with the person you want to become. And you do it regardless of how you feel, regardless of doubt, regardless of hesitation. Then you do it again, and again, and again, until it becomes part of you. Until it is no longer something you force, but something you naturally do. And through that process, something begins to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually. You stop seeing yourself through the lens of your past. And you start seeing yourself through the lens of your actions. And that is where confidence returns. Not because you convinced yourself, but because you proved it. You built evidence. And evidence is stronger than emotion, stronger than doubt, stronger than old beliefs. Over time, that evidence replaces the old identity. Not by erasing the past, but by making it irrelevant. Because who you are now is no longer connected to who you were then. Not because time passed, but because your behavior changed. And behavior is what truly defines you. So if you want to become someone different, stop analyzing who you used to be. Start acting like who you want to be, even before you feel ready, even before you fully believe it. Because belief follows action, not the other way around. And once you understand that, everything becomes simpler. Not easier, but clearer. You do not need to fix your past, you need to decide your next move and act on it without hesitation. Because that is where your identity is actually built, not in memory, not in thought, but in action. At Stoicism Breath, understand this clearly: pain is not here to destroy you, it is here to reveal you. What most people call breaking is not the end, it is a process of removal, the removal of illusions, the removal of false confidence, the removal of people habits and beliefs that were never strong enough to last. That is why it feels intense, because it is not just something leaving your life, it is something you once depended on being taken away. You lose what felt stable, what felt permanent, what you quietly built your identity around. And when that collapses, you feel lost, not because you have nothing left, but because what you used to rely on is no longer there. And without that structure, you are forced to face yourself without distraction, without excuses, without the version you were pretending to be. That moment is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Because anything that can break that easily was never strong enough to carry your future. If it stayed, it would have limited you, it would have kept you operating below your potential, accepting less, settling more, staying in environments that do not challenge you. Most people only focus on what they lost, they never see what they were freed from. Because when something breaks, it also releases you. It removes pressure, it removes expectations, it removes the need to maintain something that was not aligned with who you are becoming. But you only see that shift when you stop treating pain as punishment and start treating it as information. Pain always reveals something. It shows you where you depended too much, where you avoided responsibility, where you tolerated what you should have changed. If you pay attention, it gives you clarity, not comfort but clarity. And clarity is more valuable because clarity gives direction. It shows you what needs to be rebuilt and what needs to be left behind. This is where everything changes, not when the pain disappears, but when your response to it changes. When you stop asking, why did this happen to me, and start asking, what is this showing me, what is this pushing me to become? Because pain is not random, it follows patterns, it exposes weak structures. And when those structures collapse, you have a choice. You either rebuild the same way and repeat the same cycle, or you build differently with more awareness, more discipline, more control. That choice determines everything. It decides whether pain becomes a setback or a turning point. Rebuilding is not emotional, it is practical. You take what you learned and you apply it. You set stronger boundaries, you make clearer decisions, you stop ignoring signals you used to overlook. You stop staying in situations that drain you, you stop lowering your standards just to stay comfortable. Instead, you begin to act with intention, with structure, with a higher level of self-respect, not as a reaction, but as a standard. And this is where real strength is built. Not by avoiding pain, but by using it to refine yourself, to remove what is unnecessary and reinforce what truly matters. Over time, you start to notice something. The same situations that once broke you no longer have the same impact. The same triggers lose their power. The same patterns stop repeating. Not because life changed, but because you changed. You became more aware, more disciplined, more stable in how you respond. And that is what pain was shaping all along. Not a weaker version of you, but a sharper one. A version of you that sees clearly, acts deliberately, and does not depend on external stability to function. When you reach that point, you stop fearing pain, because you understand its role. It is not here to end you, it is here to upgrade you in ways comfort never could. And once you see that, you stop resisting it. You move through it. You take what is useful, you leave what is not, and you keep moving forward without attaching yourself to the experience. Because you understand it was part of your process, not your identity. That is the difference between someone who stays stuck and someone who evolves. One sees pain as a reason to stop. The other sees it as a signal to rebuild. And when you adopt that perspective, nothing that happens to you is wasted. Every setback becomes data, every challenge becomes direction, and every breakdown becomes the foundation for something stronger. Every loss can become direction, and every breakdown can become the beginning of something stronger when you choose to understand it and use it with intention. At Stoicism Breath, here is the shift that changes everything. Asking why keeps you stuck, asking what now moves you forward. Why feels natural, it feels justified, it feels like you are searching for answers, but in reality, it keeps you tied to something that already ended. Think about how often your mind goes back asking, why did this happen, why did they do that, why did I fail? Each time you ask that question, your focus turns backward, you start replaying, analyzing, creating scenarios that no longer exist. And the more you do it, the deeper you fall into the same loop, not because you are finding clarity, but because you are strengthening the habit of looking behind instead of moving ahead. That habit creates paralysis. You stop moving, you stop acting, you wait for clarity before taking the next step. But clarity does not come from thinking, it comes from action. And that is where most people hesitate, because action requires responsibility. It forces you to accept that no matter what happened, you are still the one who decides what happens next. That is uncomfortable because it removes blame, it removes excuses, it removes the option to stay passive. It places you in a position where you must move, even when you do not feel ready, even when you do not have all the answers. And that is exactly why it works. Because movement breaks the cycle. It interrupts overthinking, and gives your mind something real to focus on, something that exists right now and not in the past. Even small steps matter. When you start moving even slightly, something shifts. The questions that once felt heavy begin to lose their weight, not because you answered them, but because they are no longer relevant. Your focus is no longer on what happened, your focus is on what you are building. And that is where control returns. Not when everything makes sense, but when you choose to act without needing it to. You do not need a perfect plan, you do not need complete certainty. You need direction and the willingness to move. Because direction creates momentum, and momentum creates clarity. Not the other way around. So instead of asking, why did this happen, you ask, what can I do now? What is the next step? What can I change? What can I build? What can I improve? These questions shift your mind from memory to reality, from analysis to execution. And when that shift happens, your behavior changes. You stop waiting, you stop hesitating, you start acting even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it is imperfect. Because you understand that progress is not built through better thinking, it is built through consistent action. Over time, that consistency compounds. It builds results, it builds confidence, it builds a new identity based on what you do, not what you went through. That is how you break the cycle. Not by assaulting the past, but by outgrowing it. By building something that demands your attention, something that pulls you forward, something that makes old questions irrelevant. And when that happens, you realize something powerful. You were never stuck. You were just standing still, waiting for permission, waiting for closure, waiting for the perfect moment. But none of that was required. The only thing missing was a decision. The decision to stop looking back and start moving forward. And the moment you make that decision, everything begins to change. Not instantly, but steadily. You feel more focused, more grounded, more in control. Not because your circumstances changed, but because your approach changed. You stopped reacting and started directing. You stopped asking and started building. And that is where real progress begins. Not in understanding everything, but in choosing to move forward without needing to.